Okay, imagine this impossible timeline for a moment.
Uh-huh.
You're married at 12 years old.
12.
Then you find yourself widowed and 7 months pregnant at 13.
Hmm.
You give birth to your only child while, well, you're still basically a child yourself.
It's brutal.
It really is. And this isn't just some historical footnote. This is the defining opening chapter of Margaret Beaufoot's life. So for you, we're deep diving into the sources to understand how she didn't just survive this absolutely ruthless political system in 15th century England,
Right.
but actually leveraged that oppression to become arguably the most powerful woman of her time and the true architect of the Tudor dynasty.
That timeline is just, it's essential context, isn't it? She was born in 1443, daughter and sole heiress of the Duke of Somerset.
So high nobility.
Absolutely. And carrying monumental political weight from day one because of her bloodline. Descent from John of Gaunt and Catherine Swynford.
Which gave her that claim to the throne, the Lancastrian claim.
A direct claim, yes, though. Well, it was sometimes contested, as these things often were, but definitely Lancastrian.
And being the sole heiress didn't just mean she was connected, it meant she was valuable property.
Oh, incredibly valuable. Her father died when she was only about 6 months old.
6 months.
Yeah, so instantly she's this incredibly wealthy orphan, and that makes her a ward of the crown.
Wardship.
Precisely. Her inheritance, these huge tracts of land in Somerset, Devon, Dorset, it wasn't really a gift, more like strategic leverage.
Especially with the Wars of the Roses starting to bubble up.
Exactly. Controlling Margaret meant controlling immense resources, money, land, influence. She was, you could argue, the single most valuable piece on the political chessboard at that point.
So the big question we want to unpack here is, how did this child, who must have seen herself as, political prey in these great halls, how did she learn to flip that, to master the game of power and ultimately achieve her family's dynastic goal?
It's an incredible story of survival and strategy.
Okay, let's jump right into the negotiation of her first marriage. We're talking 1443 AD, maybe a Bleo castle. The sources paint a picture, don't they? Thick stone walls.
Yeah, damp probably, the scent of rushes, maybe mint and rosemary trying to cover it up.
And these powerful men, lords and bishops, discussing her future. The sources say almost as if you were a prized mare at market.
It really was a transaction, managed entirely by her guardian, William de la Pole, the Duke of Suffolk.
Right.
And the arrangement was straightforward enough on paper. Margaret, age 12, was married off to his son, John de la Pole, who was 14.
Just kids.
Barely. And the financial reality hit immediately. Suffolk gained control of all her vast holdings. He administered the estates, collected the income, basically securing all that wealth for his family's cause until she legally came of age.
The sources point to this really dark legal reality here, don't they? The wedding's in February 1444. Medieval law says you need consummation to validate the marriage. But it also kind of recognized that children couldn't really give meaningful consent.
Was this sort of arrangement, this power imbalance, was that just standard for a noble ward back then?
It was standard in the sense that wardship meant control, absolutely. But the sources do hint at the tension Margaret felt. I mean, she was treated with respect due to her rank, living in the de la Pole household.
Watched.
Oh, under constant controlling oversight, couldn't travel freely, couldn't write letters without approval. But this is where her real education started, maybe unintentionally.
How so?
During those controlled meals, public appearances, she was observing, listening, filing away every detail about alliances, who disliked whom, the subtle signs of power, learning the game by watching the players.
And then this completely unexpected event happens. John de la Pole, her young husband, dies suddenly. Fever, 1444.
Just like that.
It happened so fast, before the marriage could be legally, cemented. What was the specific legal loophole that let her reclaim her inheritance so quickly? That technicality was absolutely crucial. Because they were both so young, the courts essentially ruled the union wasn't fully consummated in the necessary legal sense. The sense required to permanently transfer her dowry and estates.
So, no legal consummation means?
It means her massive inheritance snapped right back to her, instantly. At 13, she's suddenly this incredibly wealthy heiress all over again.
And Suffolk's reaction?
Pure calculation. The sources say she was told to observe mourning naturally, but, and this is the chilling part, a mourning period that will not be extended unnecessarily.
Wow. Back on the market.
Exactly. She was merchandise again, but crucially, she just had her first very real lesson in the power of legal details.
And she used that moment, didn't she? That brief period of widowhood, even though still under Suffolk's control, to really double down on her education.
She absolutely seized it, mastered Latin, which was huge. It let her read complex religious texts, legal documents herself.
Not relying on translators or male interpretation.
Precisely. Plus French, and perhaps most importantly for her future, estate management.
Understanding her own power base.
Exactly. Because her wealth wasn't just abstract. It was thousands of acres of farmland, valuable stone quarries, timber forests, fisheries, generating this enormous annual income. She wasn't just rich. She was one of the wealthiest individuals in the entire country.
Which, ironically, only made her more vulnerable, right?
Completely. It was this inescapable trap. The wealth gave her a potential influence, but only if she played by the rules set by the powerful men controlling her.
And there's that pivotal conversation described in the sources with her mother, Margaret Beauchamp, spring 1445.
Yes, that seems right, in an herb garden, apparently. A moment of relative quiet.
And her mother, who knew the system.
Oh, she knew it well. She'd lived through arranged marriages herself. And she gave Margaret that incredibly profound piece of advice, didn't she? Telling her that her inheritance was both your strength and your chain.
Strength and chain. Powerful image. Did Margaret ask the obvious question, like, what if I just refuse to marry again?
She did, and her mother laid out the cold, hard reality. Refusal wasn't really an option, because her wardship would simply be sold off, probably to someone far less inclined to treat her well. She risked having her lands confiscated, being labeled a rebel. Essentially, ruin.
A rebel against the natural order, I think the phrase was.
That's it. Her obedience wasn't just expected, it was the condition of her very existence, her survival within that system.
Which brings us inevitably to the next sacrifice. King Henry VI himself steps in.
Yes, the king intervenes directly. He grants Margaret's wardship to his own half-brother, Edmund Tudor, the Earl of Richmond. Edmund was older, maybe around 24.
And Margaret was about 14, so another significant age gap.
Definitely. And this wasn't just about Margaret anymore. It was high politics. This marriage solidified a crucial alliance between the Lancastrians and the rising Tudors.
And Edmund, what was he like?
Ambitious, connected, and seemingly quite confident. He was a decade older, physically imposing according to descriptions.
And in terms of her wealth?
He exerted control immediately. The sources are clear. He reorganized her estates and that substantial income. It was diverted straight into funding his military ventures and political activities.
So even with all her personal wealth, she was again financially powerless within the marriage.
Utterly. Her assets were his resources.
And then, fulfilling the medieval expectation for a wife, Margaret becomes pregnant. Late 1456. She's still only 13.
13.
We really have to pause here and think about the danger. Childbirth in the 15th century was incredibly dangerous, even for grown women. For a 13-year-old, likely small-framed.
It was phenomenally risky. A near-death sentence, frankly. The odds were stacked against her survival.
And the political situation just made everything worse.
Unbelievably so. The Wars of the Roses were heating up. While she's pregnant, Edmund Tudor is captured by Yorkist forces in August 1456.
Oh, no.
And then just a few months later, in November, he dies of fever in captivity. Margaret is 7 months pregnant, suddenly widowed again, incredibly wealthy, and acutely vulnerable right in the middle of a civil war.
What a terrifying position.
Almost unimaginable.
She goes into labor at Pembroke Castle in Wales,
Yeah.
January 28th, 1457, and gives birth to her son, Henry, the future Henry VII.
Yes, and by all accounts, the birth was extraordinarily difficult and traumatic for her.
Physically traumatic.
Deeply so, and it had a lasting physical impact. While she survived, miraculously, and her son was healthy, Margaret never had another child.
Never.
Never. Which politically was monumental. It meant Henry was her sole heir, her only child. Her entire focus, all her formidable energy and intellect for the rest of her long life became concentrated on one single goal: securing his future, securing the throne for him.
This really marks that shift, doesn't it? From being, a victim of circumstance to becoming the master strategist.
Absolutely. The years after 1457 show a different Margaret emerging. Her subsequent marriages weren't about passion or even necessarily affection. They were calculated moves for protection and influence.
Starting with her third marriage in 1458, age 15, to Sir Henry Stafford.
Right. Stafford was older, established maybe around 30. This union provided crucial stability for both her and young Henry.
How so?
Stafford seems to have been reasonably supportive. He respected her rank, maybe her intellect too. Crucially, this marriage gave her breathing room, a space away from the most intense, direct royal pressures to really hone her political skills and build her networks. He protected them both during a very turbulent period.
But it's the fourth marriage, in 1472, that seems like the real masterstroke, marrying Thomas Stanley, Earl of Derby.
Ah,
Yeah.
Stanley, yes. This wasn't about stability in the same way Stafford was. This was pure political partnership, a calculated alliance based on mutual interest and survival.
Stanley was known for being flexible.
That's putting it mildly. Stanley was the ultimate political survivor, an opportunist of legendary skill. He somehow managed to hold high office and favor whether a Lancastrian or a Yorkist king was on the throne. He navigated the Wars of the Roses like nobody else.
And Margaret essentially married that adaptability, that mechanism for survival.
Exactly. This is where you see the architect fully emerge. She wasn't just seeking protection anymore. She was seeking leverage.
And the sources show she used Stanley's position brilliantly, don't they? He was Lord Steward under the Yorkist kings, Edward V, and then Richard III. That put Margaret right inside the enemy camp.
Right at the heart of the Yorkist court, physically surrounded by her son's enemies, but using that proximity for her own clandestine purposes. How deeply involved was she in maneuvering against them while technically married to one of their top officials?
Extremely deep, it seems. Especially under Richard III, her position was incredibly precarious. But Stanley's influence acted as a kind of shield.
It did. She was secretly funding Henry's exiled forces over in Brittany, wasn't she? Maintaining that vital line of communication.
Yes, and the sources detail the huge risk she took during Buckingham's rebellion in 1483, that failed plot against Richard III.
When it failed, Margaret was directly implicated in supporting it. Big trouble.
Richard III confiscated some of her lands, placed her under house arrest, essentially, but in the custody of her own husband, Stanley.
Which was, ironically, a form of protection. Richard couldn't really execute or imprison the wife of his powerful Lord Steward without risking alienating Stanley and destabilizing his own regime. He needed Stanley.
So the Stanley alliance worked exactly as she'd likely intended. It was this massive political shield.
It allowed her to take risks, coordinate plots, manage Henry's invasion plans, things that would have meant treason and execution for almost anyone else. She was playing a double game right under the king's nose, with her husband effectively providing the cover, perhaps even turning a blind eye or subtly assisting right up until the very last moment.
And that critical moment arrives.
Yeah.
August 1485, Bosworth Field.
The showdown.
Her husband, Thomas Stanley, famously holds his significant forces back while Henry Tudor engages Richard III directly.
A calculated delay.
Then, at the crucial point, Stanley makes his move, commits his troops to Henry's side, ensuring the Yorkists' defeat and Richard's death.
That strategic hesitation, followed by decisive action almost certainly coordinated with Margaret, was the final game-winning move. When Henry Tudor stood victorious on that field, Margaret, now 42 years old, achieved something unprecedented.
She became My Lady the King's mother.
Exactly, a title created for her. She transformed all that trauma, all that political maneuvering forced upon her since childhood into real, tangible, unrivaled political power at the right hand of her son, the king.
Looking back at that whole arc, her transformation is just. It's extraordinary, from child bride passed around for political gain to using the very system that oppressed her wealth, her status, the marriage market using it as a tool, weaponizing it even, to become the founder of the Tudor dynasty.
Her legacy is undeniable. The establishment of one of England's most successful, most famous royal lines through her son, Henry VII, and grandson, Henry VIII. She proved that intelligence, incredible financial skill, and sheer unrelenting determination could navigate and even manipulate the severe constraints placed on women in medieval society.
And later in life, she focused on other things, too.
Very much so. She poured enormous energy and wealth into religious devotion. Founding colleges, Christ's College and St. John's College at Cambridge, still exist today, supporting religious institutions, actively cultivating this image of piety and learning, building a different kind of legacy.
Her story really is the ultimate illustration, isn't it? How someone can fight against and work within deeply ingrained social constraints to achieve agency. But, as you said, it clearly came at a huge personal cost.
Immense cost. Trauma, loss, likely loneliness despite her power.
Margaret definitely seems to have sacrificed personal happiness, maybe fulfillment, endured that extreme trauma, all for political success. She gained that immense power. But sources do suggest her later years, even as the revered king's mother, were marked by a certain isolation. So, considering the ruthless political compromises she absolutely made during the Wars of the Roses, supporting different sides when necessary, orchestrating betrayals, all to protect and advance her son, Here's something for you to think about.
Yeah.
Was her profound religious devotion and all that foundation work later in life purely spiritual faith?
Mm-hmm.
Or was it perhaps also, maybe subconsciously, maybe strategically, a form of penance? A way to build a moral legacy, a pious reputation that deliberately counterbalanced the sheer ruthlessness required for her political victory.
That's a fascinating question. Faith and strategy intertwined.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now, when you see that famous bronze effigy of Margaret in Westminster Abbey, that serene, pious face, consider the journey. Consider the woman who was in many ways broken as a child, but who rebuilt herself piece by strategic piece into a woman of absolute steel.
A remarkable figure.
Truly. And that's where we'll end this deep dive.